He had already handed over all his money to the robber, yet the robber, because of a cheap engagement ring of sentimental value, accidentally killed his fiancée. Panicked by what he had done, the robber fled immediately, leaving Hart frozen in place, consumed by despair, forced to watch as his lover's body grew cold. Strangely, after the incident, Hart neither went to the police nor sought revenge. Instead, he shut himself in his lab, buried in mathematical equations. Even when the housekeeper called him for meals, he barely responded. A curious friend came to check on him. Hart grew visibly nervous, making up excuses to send him away, which only made his friend more suspicious. When the friend noticed something hidden behind a curtain, Hart became agitated. The friend had no choice but to say he'd return next week.
In a week we'll never even have this conversation.
Behind the curtain was a time machine Hart had built. Encased in full metal, it radiated the steampunk aesthetic of 1909. The thought of going back to save his lover drove him to push the ignition lever without hesitation. Yet things were far more complicated than he imagined. As the machine reached peak operation, the front and rear discs emitted intense beams of light. After a moment's hesitation, Hart slowly placed his hand on the control lever, and time began visibly flowing backward. Suddenly, he was back on the night of their date. Since another version of himself already existed in that time, Hart decided to take Emma away from the area to avoid the robber. He thought he had succeeded, but while he was buying flowers, Emma was killed by an out-of-control carriage. No matter what he tried afterward, Emma kept dying that night, one way or another. Confused and desperate, Hart decided to travel to the future in search of answers. As the time machine whirred to life again, the world around him began changing rapidly. Day and night flickered past unseen. Plants in the lab sprouted, grew. Seasons changed in the blink of an eye. Later generations turned his lab into a warehouse. Cars evolved at breathtaking speed. Women's liberation progressed, and mannequin skirts grew shorter in shop windows. Hart grew even more determined to save Emma. But in his distraction, the locket containing her picture slipped out of the time machine. Once outside the protective field, the photo rapidly decayed. As pain shot through his hand, Hart had to let it go, watching helplessly as the image turned to dust. When he looked up again, skyscrapers pierced the city skyline. Human machines now soared through the air and explored outer space. There was even a large modern base on the far side of the moon. Words flashed across a screen in front of him. Hart released the control lever, and the time was finally set at the year 2030. People no longer relied on cars, but used eco-friendly shared bikes instead. A bold-looking blonde woman noticed Hart and complimented his retro style, mistaking his time machine for a coffee steamer. Hart was stunned. After all these years, humans actually have no idea about time machines. Worried but undeterred, he headed to the library, only to find it completely bookless. In the future, children learned through fast-access ebooks, and AI technology had advanced greatly. The library was managed by a single AI librarian, its memories stored in a large metal sphere in the hall. Fascinated, Hart studied the glass panel in front of him, until the AI grew impatient, explaining that it was a third-generation nuclear-powered database, containing all of humanity's knowledge. This is exactly what Hart wanted. But after searching multiple fields of study, he found no useful theories on time travel. When he asked why the past couldn't be changed, the AI replied that traveling to the past was impossible to begin with, let alone altering it. It soon grew tired of his foolish questions. Under pressure, the AI pulled up 4-century-old papers on time concepts, including one written by Hart himself. But because his research was considered too far-fetched, no one had continued it, though a friend of his had once made a sci-fi movie based on the idea. Beyond that, there was no helpful information. Unable to find answers, Hart decided to travel further into the future. Suddenly, the time machine shook violently. Thinking it had malfunctioned, Hart hurriedly stopped it. The year was 2037. The once bustling streets were now in ruins. Confused, Hart stepped out to look around, only to be quickly found by a rescue team, who urged him to evacuate immediately. When Hart looked up, he saw the moon covered in cracks. It turned out that during a lunar colonization attempt, humans had accidentally blown it out of Earth's orbit, causing it to break apart. The Earth's ecosystem had suffered catastrophic damage. Not planning to stay and die, Hart took advantage of the chaos caused by erupting magma and dashed back to his machine. But though he started it immediately, the impact from the moon fragmentation still struck, and his head hit a metal part, knocking him unconscious. In his dazed state, he accidentally pushed the control lever again, sending the machine racing forward at maximum speed. Outside, the world transformed from fire and ruin into a barren wasteland. Rain began to fall, forming puddles, then rivers, then canyons as the crust shifted. Even stone could not withstand the passage of time. Gradually, the earth began to heal itself. Plants of all kinds started to grow. Then temperatures plummeted, ushering in an ice age. Hart's breath froze on his beard, but soon, the climate warmed again, glaciers melting before his eyes. Life returned once more. Hart woke groggily and shut down the machine. It had finally stopped in the year 800-2000. When he woke again, he was in a farmhouse, his wounds treated and his clothes cleaned. As he dressed, confused, a young boy appeared. Though their faces were somewhat similar, they couldn't understand each other's language. The boy ran off, scared. Hart followed him outside, and was stunned. The house stood above a deep canyon, with cocoon-like structures clinging to the cliffs. It didn't look like the future he had imagined. He caught up with the boy, only to be surrounded by tribal villagers. Unable to explain himself, he was saved by a woman named Mara, a teacher who had studied ancient scripts and could communicate with him. When Hart told her he'd traveled through time, Mara was shocked but didn't dismiss his story. After all, ancient civilizations were far more advanced. However, the other members of the tribe have a relatively low level of education, so Marla falsely claimed that Hart was an idiot with a head injury. In this way, Hart temporarily had a place to stay. Suddenly, a horn sounded. The villagers grew serious, pulling up hanging boats with ropes. At first, Hart thought they were afraid of theft, but Mara told him people here no longer understood stealing, or even the concept of distrust. Humanity had returned to a state of pure innocence. The shattered moon lay across the sky like a river of stars, and the earth had regenerated once again. Hart marveled at the planet's resilience. Little did they know that beneath this harmonious appearance, hiding a shocking conspiracy that has been carried out by humanity for tens of thousands of years.